Hey, Scott Grove here from Imagine Woodworking, and I'd like to share with you how I condition veneer. Conditioning veneer does two things. One, it will soften or plasticize your veneer. So if you have veneer that's flat or wrinkled, but let's say it's flat and it looks good, but it's really dry. And when you're working with it, it's really hard to cut, and it'll crack and chip and what have you. So plasticizing veneer will soften the veneer and just make it work really, really easy. In addition, it will help flatten your veneer. So if you have really wrinkled veneer, it might be soft, but it might just really, really wrinkled. It's still very difficult to work with. So conditioning veneer will flatten and plasticize or soften your veneer. And it just makes it so much easier to work with veneer. Absolutely love it. So I have a project coming up in 2 weeks that's going to be about creating radials and radial matching. You can see pre-recorded. You can see that recorded class at Imagine Woodworking. So I've got a pack of veneer here, and the way I sort of test it if it's dry enough or not, I sort of press it between my forefinger and middle finger and see if it cracks. And you see how that's sort of real brittle. I could probably manage to do this, but you give us these little things popping off, and it would just be, I think the technical term is a pain in the ass. So I've decided to go ahead and condition this veneer. So from a wrinkly standpoint, you know, there are a couple areas that have these big curls, especially with the burl. Burl has a tendency to have a lot of swirly grain, and it wrinkles up and it just doesn't lay flat. My general rule of thumb is if you take a quarter, you put it on the veneer and you kind of roll it around, and or you lay it flat, and if there's an 1/8 of an inch distance between sort of the center of the quarter to the edge of the quarter, that's probably too much of a curve for you to work with, because when you're trying to seam this together, it just makes it more difficult. If you had wrinkled veneer and it was soft enough, you could probably press it in one sheet, not doing any seams. You might be able to get success with that, although it could possibly split open when you press it. So it's one reason why you might want to flatten it also. Now, there are commercial flattening or softening agents on the market. They're proprietary formulations. Some of them work great, some of them don't. Some of them require a hot press or heat to get rid of all their solvents and plasticizers. And I've had, quite frankly, problems with that in the past, where I flattened it with those commercial conditioners, and I don't have a hot press, so I'm pressing in my vacuum bag, and the adhesion, it inhibited the adhesion. So I really didn't like that experience. So, and this is probably 30 years ago. So since then, I've spent my life working with veneer and dedicating myself to that. I've come up with this formulation. It's not my formulation. I found it, you know, sort of on the internet, but in the last 20 years, I've modified it. I've talked to a lot of chemists and just people that are much smarter than I am in the veneering and the chemistry and adhesives, and I've refined my formulation. So I guess this is my formulation. I've written a book on the subject. Oh, cheap. I've written a book on veneering. Initially, for those of you know, I've sort of pioneered what's called a spiral match, and Schiffer Publishing wanted me to write a book on that. And when I started writing it, I was kind of saying, well, to understand a spiral match, you probably need to know what a book match is. And you know, and I didn't know where to start on the book. So don't let the advanced veneering fool you. It is a comprehensive book, starting from buying veneer, inspecting veneer, repairing veneer, seaming veneer, book matching, repair and touch up, and the conditioning. I write about the conditioning process, although since then I've refined the process. So what I'm going to show you here today is a revised 2.0 version. And then just the last chapter is dedicated to the spiral match, but we kind of didn't think about that, but it's a comprehensive book, so check that out. That is available on my website. So, getting back to conditioning. So this particular project, as I said, we're going to do radial matching. You can look on the courses that'll be up, and I want to condition this veneer because I'll be making a lot of cuts and coming to fine points, and I just want to be easy to work with. So that's why you would condition veneer. There, besides commercial softening or plasticizers. There's another, Thomas Schrunk has a video where he heats it up. So you can take an iron, and he uses aluminum plates, and heats up the aluminum plates and stacks each sheet of veneer between the aluminum plates. You can do this in a hot press also. What that does is liquefy the lignin, which is the resin that holds the fibers together. Now that's great, and that will relax those fibers and sort of flatten the veneer, but it won't soften the veneer. So that process is great if you're just trying to flatten. So you could use an iron if you will, but usually when you iron, it has a tendency to dry the veneer out. Granted, this process adds moisture in, and I'll show you how to get rid of that moisture. So this is a pack of veneer, and I'm going to mix up enough of my softening agent or conditioner for this. It typically takes about a quart of veneer to do 10 square feet. Okay, so this is about 20 square feet of veneer. This is a full pack, which is 24 leaves, and usually it'll tell you how many square footage, or you can do the math. It's pretty simple to do. So I need 2 quarts of distilled water. If you have really hard water, that could be a problem. The minerals, especially if you're softening, say, a really light wood like maple or burl, something like that, the salts or the minerals in your hard water may be a problem. So distilled water is always a safe bet. It is 2 parts PVA glue. I just like Titebond white glue, just basic white glue. 1 part glycerin. So you can get glycerin at a pharmacy. You usually buy them in little small things. And now this is FDA, government approved. If you're doing a lot of this, you can buy a large gallon of this at a feed store. They use a glycerin for cow udders to keep them soft and supple and all that. So you can get that a lot cheaper at a feed store. A little tip for the day there. Then half a part alcohol and a half a part acetone. If you don't have acetone, some states it's hard, or countries. So I was teaching in Brazil and we couldn't get acetone. So you just double that up and make it 1 part alcohol. And these are plasticizers, softeners, and drying agents and all, and wetting agents. That's sort of the combination. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So the last thing you want to know about is when you're mixing all these materials together, you want to add the glue last. For some reason, if you mix all these materials together, you put the glue in, and then you add the glycerin last, I think the technical term is it turns into snot. It just coagulates and doesn't dissolve and disperse the glycerin. I'm not really sure what the chemistry behind that is, but that's one thing you'd want to note. So I typically add the glycerin to my sort of clear liquids, and that disperses it and blends it all in, and then the last part I do is I add my glue. So let's go ahead and mix some of this up, and you can see what this is about. So the math behind this, if we've got 3, 2, 1, and 1, that's 7 parts. Now if I need 2 quarts, that is 64 ounces. 64 ounces divided by 7 parts is 9 ounces. I'm just going to round that up for 10. You're going to have some waste and what have you. So it's 10 ounces per part. So we just go from there. So I'm going to take my half a part here and mix some of this out. So I have 5 ounces of acetone, 5 ounces of denatured alcohol, bring that up to 10. And this is not rocket science here, so if you're sloppy and you're not measuring accurate, you don't have to sweat that. Then we want 1 part of glycerin. Bring us up to 20. I'm just going to sort of mix this around in here. The acetone and alcohol will dissolve the glycerin, hopefully, and then we'll add the water. There's that. Then we want 3 parts, 30 ounces of water. Make sure that glycerin dissolves really well. And then we can add our 2 parts, 20 ounces of PVA glue. So we got 20 ounces here. definitely want to make sure that glue is all blended in with the solution. And if you don't have a measuring cup, you can certainly just use a regular old sort of drinking cup and just mark a line. It doesn't really matter what that is. That's what your part increment is. You can just kind of measure that a bunch of times. The only key is make sure that it's not a cup that will dissolve with the acetone. I've used for small projects these little salsa cups, and you put acetone in here and it dissolves the cup, and you get a big mess. So just be aware of that. Okay, so now we got a nice looking solution here, and we want to now soak our veneer with the solution. There's a whole variety of ways you can do this, and I've done it a whole variety of ways, and I think this method is probably the best if you have small enough veneer. So I just have to get one of these Tupperware tubs, and if my veneer fits in there, I know I'm sort of good to go. If you're doing larger sheets, I will take some 2x4s and lay 2x4s on my bench and put plastic and sort of make a big soaking tray. You don't have to soak it, you can simply brush it on. You'd want to brush it on both sides. So I've done that also and for a larger project, but you know, if it's small, just soak it. It's just easier that way. So we're gonna roll up our sleeves here and kind of get to work. Simply take my solution in. A lot of people ask, can you save the solution? You can if you want. If you put it in a tight jar, you may lose some of the acetone and denatured alcohol. That still seems to migrate out, but you could use that and then freshen it up with some more material. Although, frankly, with the walnuts or the darker woods, the tannins and the pigments will leach out and discolor. So you wouldn't want to use sort of a brown liquid to, say, soften maple or something like that. So I'm simply just going to put each sheet in here one at a time. I want to keep these in sequence, and we'll talk about that at the pattern matching class or the radial matching class. And I'm just going to put these in sequence, same face up. As I said, you could, if these were large sheets, you could, brush the material on. And if I did it that way, I would want to make sure that I fold it over and get both sides. I usually take these sheets and, as I said, put it in plastic, brush it on, and then I'll maybe just pour whatever excess material and wrap the whole thing up and let it soak for a bit. I really want to make sure that this material is being fully saturated. And we're going to go ahead and just do that. I'm sort of just putting on both sides just to sort of speed things up. And this will help plasticize the wood fibers, making it soft and supple. I head up the veneering program at the Chippendale School of Furniture in Scotland, and we usually have the students make pencils or wrap their pencils. So you take this material here, and it'll be so soft and supple that you'll be able to wrap it around a pencil. And this is also good for ring makers if you're trying to make sort of these laminated rings where we wrap the strips of veneer, a long strip, and you just do it about 5 or 6 times. And that's a great technique. Sort of domestic woods or straight grain woods are easy, but if you're doing any figured woods or burls, usually the grain is too tight and gnarly, and it'll break. So this is the solution you use to soften the veneer and make a ring lamination. So now this is kind of getting full here. So I might need to start brushing. First I need to wipe my hands and roll my sleeves up a little more. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to pile these all up to the side. And all my safety precautions have been removed for your viewing pleasure. I'm getting quite quite a good whiff here of this acetone and alcohol. Normally I would wear a respirator, but I don't think that would be a problem. Now, this material will since it has glue in there, besides the glue acting as a plasticizer, it also will keep the grains flat. So this solution will help hold the veneer down flat. So when I store it, I want to be sure I've pressed it between two boards and keeping it flat, and it will hold that flatness, if you will. Any veneer, if you don't store properly, when it absorbs ambient moisture in the air and expands and contracts, it'll eventually sort of slowly wrinkle up. So it's always good to keep your veneer sort of pressed between two pieces of cardboard or plywood with weights on top, or you can even bind it with a strapping or tape or whatever you need to do there. So that looks like we did just about the right amount. And for what it's worth, since I started on the bottom, I'm going to take this entire pack and flip it over. So these top leaves, or these last leaves that I was doing and just brushing on, are now sitting down in the solution. So I'll let that soak for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. I really want to make sure that the solution has really worked its way through. Now, veneer is typically thin. It's usually a Western cut is 1/42 of an inch, so it doesn't take too long for this veneer to soak in. I can start feeling it getting soft and supple, so you can already see that. Now that is your pencil radius, right? There's a 1/4 inch radius, so that is already softened. So the next thing is, now we've saturated this veneer. Now I need to dry it out. So this is a key step in the entire process, and there's a variety of ways of doing it. I think I've got the fastest way. I'm going to show you, and I'll explain some of the pitfalls of what you got to look out for. I'm going to rinse my hands first, though. I guess I should be wearing gloves. So let me explain the process here. We're going to first squeegee all the excess surface moisture or liquid on the veneer. You could do this by wiping with a paper towel, although in a whole pack you're going to go through a lot of paper towels. So I found just squeegeeing it works. I get one of these sort of automotive squeegees when you're polishing cars. You get this in an automotive store. I also have a kit on my Imagine woodworking site. A kit is a platform for you to organize links and resources. So if you go there, there's a veneering section. It'll have all the tools that I use for my various classes. So you'll see that there. That'll, I think, take you right to Amazon if you want to buy that, or go to your local automotive store. They should have these. They're silicone, and they're great for squeegeeing off water. So that's the first thing, where you want to get rid of the water. So we squeegee off the surface, then we're going to start pressing it between sheets of fiberglass screen and newspaper. So we'll get to that in a second. I want to take my lid here, take the lid of this bin, and I'm just going to take these. I think we've soaked these enough. Try to get rid of all that excess moisture. I'll just put this over here. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of melamine, and I just sort of put a little glue block on here, and I can create this sort of little squeegee. This is a little short for what I'm doing, but I think we'll be able to work it. I've also put a bead of silicone around the outside to help it from dripping off the edge and making a mess all over my bench. Again, it probably would be a good idea to put paper down or plastic on my bench, but so be it. And I have a piece of melamine on that side. I'm just going to take my veneer and I'm simply squeegeeing off the excess moisture, and then I take the moisture off the board. And again, we don't do it too crazy, but this certainly helps the process. Now you do want to work relatively quickly here because I have this pile here that is still diluted glue. I can't go to lunch or anything. If I left that pile to sit, it would glue itself together. I'll show you how we manage that. So we'll do a time lapse on this. Okay, so now we have got rid of most of the moisture off the surface. You know, obviously you can see there are bits here. I didn't get too crazy. As I mentioned, if you're only doing 1 or 2 pieces and you don't want to set up the squeegee and the whole thing, you could simply wipe this down with a paper towel to help get rid of that surface moisture. The next thing we want to do is we want to absorb that moisture while we press it. So this material is now flexible, right? We've softened it, but we have not flattened it. So we're going to be flattening it, and at the same time, we're going to be absorbing and removing all that moisture. So how do we do that? I'm going to be pressing this in between sheets of paper. Now, if I just put it between paper, this has glue in it. So don't do that. You know, you'll end up with a very expensive laminated paper and wood veneer block of wood. And we need to protect the paper with fiberglass screening. So we use fiberglass screening, not aluminum screening, and we protect the paper with that. Now, with that said, a technique that I've developed that people kind of think I'm a little crazy here is I take just regular sort of non-gloss paper. It can be butcher paper, non-waxed. You don't want to use newspaper in this step because the solvents will dissolve the ink, and that ink will in fact transfer to the veneer. So I'm simply going to take sheets of paper and sandwich this between each one. And this step is a risky step. I want to sort of admit that right off the bat, because I risk gluing my paper to the veneer. So I'm going to just use this very, very quickly, blot this on. We're basically using the paper as a blotting medium. And I'm not going to put it in a press or under clamps or anything. I'm simply just going to sort of lean on it, and the surface contact, again, will get that remaining surface moisture. You can kind of see it, obviously, if it's shiny, you know there's moisture on that surface, and that's the first thing we sort of want to get rid of. The squeegeeing help. Using paper towels would also do in this particular step. But as you can imagine, there's a whole roll of paper towels. It's a lot cheaper and a lot faster to just kind of do it this way. So this is sort of one modified step. I haven't found anybody else to do this, but I've flattened a lot of veneer in my time. And if you pay attention, don't take any phone calls. Don't go to the loo. So I've got this all stacked up, and I can simply take a board and just press on it a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm starting to flatten it. If you have really dry and brittle material, you want to do this softly because you could still crack the material. You want those fibers to sort of relax. So I'm now just pressing them down, and I'm good to go with my stacking between the fiberglass screening. And we need to flip this over. This right like that. Oh. So, now again, work from the bottom. That was the first one I did. Pull this off. And I'm going to take my screening. So the screening, I have a whole bunch of it in rolls and sheets. Sometimes I will just work off of a roll or a long sheet, because if you keep cutting this stuff down, you know, you end up with a really small piece. But if you have a roll, you can sort of weave it back and forth, and that makes it certainly a lot easier. So I can take this paper off, and now you can see this paper, it has absorbed a lot of this excess moisture. Now it's not as shiny, and I have not glued the stack together. So this is, it just speeds things up to just, again, to get rid of that excess moisture. So now I'm going to take this and put this on a screening. Now what you want to do is you want to put paper underneath the screening. So you want paper, screen, veneer, and this is where this gets a little crazy here, and then I want screen again. So I've got screen touching the veneer on both sides. Then I can put some more paper. Then I put screen, pull this back over, another sheet of veneer. I also like to try to line the veneer up once you get going here, so it's aligned on top of the previous sheet. If they sort of overhang as the stack gets higher, and then we go ahead and press this, you're gonna press in a crease into the veneer. So kind of keep sneaking and looking underneath it, make sure your veneer is lined up. So I should have rolled this all up ahead of time. Let's see if we can make this a little easier to work with. Okay. There we go. Now I'm going to take my newspaper, put a sheet of newspaper here, and again, screening, veneer, screening, paper, screening. Now, this sounds really easy to do, but inevitably, it's so simple you can screw it up. There must be a term for that. But I always do this with my students, and there's always, everybody's standing around. You got the quality control people, and then there's one guy, could be me, who always seems to get it out of sequence. And there you go. So we will time lapse this and rock and roll on that. Okay, so as you can see, I used a variety of sizes of screening, you know, working off a roll. If the roll's too long, it gets a little crazy. Try to keep it rolled up. That makes life a lot easier. But I have a variety of sizes of these. I don't label it, I probably should. And I try to pay special attention to that the veneer is all sort of lined up and not zigzagging. And now I'm going to sort of put a coal or a platen on top. And now we're ready to flatten this. I could put clamps. I could clamp this pack together if I wanted to. That's not a bad way. The key is to have even pressure, just like pressing veneer. You don't want to have one single clamp in the middle because it'll spring up this way. Don't drive your car on this. Trust me, I've tried it. It doesn't work. But I use a vacuum bag. That's going to apply even pressure. We're going to put this in vacuum bag for about an hour because the veneer is still real wet and that paper is going to absorb a lot of moisture. That absorption rate sort of slows down as the paper gets, you know, equalizes with the veneer. So I want to change the paper. I typically change the paper after an hour. Then I let it go for, say, 3 hours. I'll change the paper, and then I'll usually let it go actually overnight. Some people will just change the paper once and then let that paper sit in overnight. But my theory is that if it's real dry paper, it's at equilibrium. As you get closer, then it sort of slows down. Where if the paper's really, if the veneer is real wet and the paper's real dry, that first sort of curve, if you will, they're going to come closer to reach equilibrium, and then they sort of slow down. So the more often you can change the paper, sort of the faster or the better it's going to be. As I said, I typically do 3 changes, but you'll get a sense as you change the paper, you're going to sort of feel the veneer, and it still feels real wet. You might have to do another paper change. This is usually an entire day process. I will typically do this in the morning, change the paper after an hour, then after 3 hours, then I might change it one more time before I leave the shop, and then I just let that sit in a press overnight. So we'll follow along with that, and we'll see you tomorrow, and you'll see how flat and supple and beautiful this is. And for what it's worth, if you noticed, I found some pieces of old veneer. I must have done this at least 2 years ago. Excuse me. So this veneer is still flat, pretty supple. Obviously, you're going to lose some plasticization over time, but the PVA glue is what gives it that additional long-lasting plasticization. You know, it keeps it supple. Where other traditional conditioners are all solvent-based, they have glycerin in there, but all that stuff does dry out over time. So that's one reason I kind of like my method or my formulation, and we'll go from there. And then lastly, if you leave a direct contact, you may get your newspaper sticking to your veneer, so you want to be careful about that. And lastly, pay attention to any little bits of veneer that may pop off and sort of fall in between the pressing, because that will put an indentation in your veneer. So keep your veneer nice and clean. Okay, let's go to the press and we'll show you what that's all about. Okay, here's my vacuum bag table. I actually got a couple bags. The bottom one is for flat. This is my laminating bag. It's an old polyurethane bag. Since I'm doing with a really high stack, there's going to be quite a bit of stretch. Even though polyurethane bags have much better memory, I use them for different things, so I like to have my other bag. So this is a bottom feed bag. Has a scored platen in here that'll help evacuate the air from all around. So we're just going to put this in manually. We got a platen on the top and the bottom. Slide that in. Since it's a bottom feed and I've got these score, I don't have to worry about any sort of breather, because these score lines will help evacuate the air from all around. One thing that I do to help also save the bag, it's just got these rubber sheets. Some of these are just rubber or rubber roofing, and I put them on the corners. So the sharp corners of those platens will help protect the bag. You could round those platens over, but I find this is just a little easier. And now I'm just double checking to make sure that everything is sort of lined up. I got a bad memory is I have these little Expo markers, these dry whiteboard dry erase markers. It's now 3 o'clock. I just write 3 o'clock on there, or write on a piece of paper. So I know if I get distracted, I know that at 4 o'clock I've got to come back and put this. You want to put 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, then there's no confusion. In at 3, out at 4, and I'll change the paper. Then I'll probably come back out later tonight after the game, go Bills, and then change the paper one more time. So, see you in a bit. You can't stay in there too long, so don't worry about that. Okay, so let's take a look. First thing I do is I kind of feel the paper, and this paper is damp. For what it's worth, the fact that it's been protected by the screen, sort of moisture, there's not a lot of glue on here, and I usually just save these, let them sit, and a month from now they'll dry out just naturally and we'll be good to go to use it again. So that's what sort of all that newspaper is about. Unwrap this, and look at that. So now I've got a very flexible, look how flexible that is, flattened veneer. This is just wonderful stuff. I refer to it as working with leather. It sort of feels that way. There is a little wrinkling on the side here, and that's probably because the stack was so high and this was sort of hanging off. So you know, we're gonna sort of fix that later. I'll show you how that's done at the last pressing. But in any event, we're gonna undo this and just remove all the paper and the screening. Again, kind of gets a little crazy. So maybe if we pay a little more attention to how the screen is, I think this was its own piece there. Set that there, and then I went this way. Again, I like to kind of keep these in sequence and orientation. side. And now we can roll. Best we can. Working with a super large piece isn't always the easiest thing to do. Okay, that was first pressing. Now we're going to do number 2. Basically, same routine. What I'm going to do here is, oh, paper. See, I almost screwed up. Paper screen. I'm going to line the veneer up with the edge of this plantain. There's a bit of a risk that it might fall over and then get bent, but I think this might help keep me aligned when I'm putting veneer on top. After I get the whole thing packed up, I can slide the thing back over, but let's see if that makes a difference. But there's our second paper change. I think I did that in about 15 minutes or so. So it gives you a sense of time. Let's put this back in the vacuum press. I will let this time go for maybe 2-3 hours, and then we'll switch it one more time. I could let this sit overnight, but the next step is sort of a another little twist on it to help flatten it out and keep everything lined up, because it'll be dry enough, and we'll do it without the screening the next time. So I'll see you in a bit here. Let's go take care of that. Here you go. So I wrote 5 o'clock, come back in maybe 3 hours, 8 o'clock. We'll switch this one more time. See you then. Okay, it's 8:20. It's been, whoa, 3.5 hours or so. And we are good to go with our last paper change. Okay, so I pull these out. Oh, these are looking good now. Now, for what it's worth, this one was paper to paper, and it didn't stick. So there's always a gamble when you're doing that. My hunch was that it wouldn't, and I was right, and I've got a nice flat, flexible piece of veneer. So I could have done that, but boy, if it sticks, that's a problem. So let's go ahead and take all these out. So although this paper feels wet, I'm just going to set this aside, put it on a shelf, let it go for a couple months, and it'll all dry out. I can use that again. So you're going to start getting a sense of how moist this is just by the feel. And I can tell that I'm pretty dry. There's no sheen, very flexible, flat, although there is some wrinkles because of the misalignment. And this is where I do my one last press without the screen. So I do one last press, I just use paper, and in this case it'll be a lot easier to line all the veneer up all on one edge, reference one edge, so there won't be any overhang, and I can press that really nice and flat. I've got a melamine sheet here. The veneer is dried out enough where it's not going to stick to the paper. Here I'm just using butcher's paper, construction paper, no particular reason. Usually the construction paper is a little thicker, it'll absorb a little more moisture. And there you go. So what I might do is even try to pick this stack up and really try to make everything line up. The edges are good. And I'm going to put this in the press, let it sit overnight, we'll have some nice, flat, soft, supple, leather-like veneer in the morning. See you then. Okay, it's the next day, and that was our third and final pressing. Let's take a look. So in this one, I paid special attention to lining up the edges so they're not overhanging in the stack, and that seemed to have flattened out that sort of wrinkly edge. I now have dry. You can feel it, there's like no moisture in here. Flexible, look how flexible that is. So compared to this, right? I don't have that at all. That's probably a 1/2 inch radius that I could bend before it snaps, which is great. If you're doing compound veneering, certainly there's some other techniques you can do. You can add steam to this. I'll be doing a course in the future that'll show various ways of doing compound veneering, either with an iron hand application and manipulation, or what's called the compression mold. A couple different ways you can do that. And I've been doing this for a while, and can show you a lot of examples of how I veneered the nude figure and the bowling ball and pencils and everything else. So we'll be covering that. Look for that at Imagine Woodworking. This particular bundle here we'll be using in our radial match. So look for that. The sapwood is going to really give us a lot of nice figure. And you can kind of feel here, there is a little stickage, adhesion. There's no paper coming off, and that's not a problem. If there was, usually it's just a small sort of layer, and you can take a card scraper and certainly get rid of that paper fibers if there are. But this is perfect. And I like that last pressing where you press directly to paper. You seem to just get a much smoother finish. The screening can impregnate a slight texture into the veneer. I've never found that to be a problem. After pressing the glue, or during pressing, the moisture in the glue seems to swell those fibers, those compressed fibers back up. And or a light wiping of the surface after pressing with a damp sponge will also help swell or raise the grain. And that's common practice anyhow that I like to do. It takes care of any scoring marks or knife marks from the veneer slicing process, and also verifies your adhesion. I covered that in my repairs course, so look for that also. But this is coming out really nice. Let's go to the hyperlapse. So I can't stress enough what a joy it is to work with conditioned veneer. It's flat, makes seaming really, really easy. Cutting, the stuff cuts like leather. There's something we just call sort of a leather state. You literally could use scissors, and you could cut this stuff. You can slice it with a utility knife real easy. It just works so nice. I typically like to work with this, within 2-3 days, say. It still has some softness and that leather quality in the properties. Makes it real easy to work with. Storing it, I would want to store it flat between 2 pieces of plywood. If I'm really doing a nice job, I actually might put some screws in here to sort of clamp that together. If you want to sort of maintain some of that suppleness to it, I could wrap it with stretch tape. That'll sort of keep the moisture in. It really depends on your environment. I'm in the wintertime here. I got a fireplace going, so it's pretty dry in here. So to prevent that from drying out, I'll wrap this in the stretch wrap. That'll sort of keep the moisture in. If it does dry out, that's okay, but it will be flat, so it'll still be easier to work with because it's flat, not wrinkly. It really depends on what you're doing with it. And lastly, as I said, you can save your paper. So I'm going to keep this up. I can feel there's some moisture in there. Put that back on a shelf, and that will also dry out. So I hope this helps in and letting you know what can be done with conditioning veneer. Again, conditioning veneer is flattening and softening the veneer. So there are two things you're doing to it, and keep this in mind. Give this a try next time you're doing any sort of veneering project. If your veneer is wrinkly and or brittle, it's a good process to do. So thanks again for watching. Please check out my free newsletter at Imagine Woodworking. It's for design tips. Gives you sort of short and sweet ways of looking at your projects. And then I have my Veneer Me Crazy series, which is at Imagine Woodworking. And that's a weekly, or that is a monthly series covering a lot of topics in my book and more. We'll be covering the compound veneering and marquetry and patterns and touch-up and repair. You name it, it's all on there. Really enjoying that process. So stay safe. See you next time. Okay, take care.